Hi, everyone. We're going to give folks just another minute or so to join us before we get started today. We're so glad you're here today.
Fantastic. I already see names I know.
All right. Let's go ahead and get started. I think we do still have a few folks that are joining us today, and that's perfectly fine. We're so glad to have everyone here today. As you noticed, we have changed the format just a little bit for our webinars. We felt that there was a lot of benefit for having live webinars where we could have live Q&A and be able to interact more with presenters. And so we're kicking that off at the beginning of the new year. So welcome, and we're very excited to share with you our presentation today on communities of practice, creating community and shared learning to support student success. My name is Chris Tillman. I'm the manager of education programming here at NISOD, and I am super happy to have my colleague here with me, Victoria Rios, and I'm going to let her introduce herself now.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria, happy to help present on communities of practice today. For NISOD, I'm very fortunate to support partnerships and our large member community of community and technical colleges. Thank you so much for joining us today. Chris, let's get started.
Yeah, and before we advance to the next slide, we do want to invite you to put questions in the Q&A box. That will help us keep track of questions that are being shared. And then comments, please feel free to put those in the chat and continue to introduce yourselves. We love knowing who is here with us today. I sure wish I could see your faces, but we are so glad to see familiar names in the chat and have you with us. Also, if you can't find the Q&A box, you can go ahead and drop your questions in chat and we will find them there and address them as those come in. And also we have made a little bit of time at the end for Q&A there as well. And we should be able to have you either ask those live and be able to unmute you and have you ask the questions live or put them in the chat either way. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. And this is a question that we would love to ask you and get some information from you. First off, how familiar are you with communities of practice? Excellent, so many quick responses. It looks like we've got still some answers coming in, but kind of a mixture of familiarity with this concept. And probably as we go along, you'll realize that maybe you knew a little bit more about it than you thought you did, and maybe it's just a new term that you haven't been introduced to before. Excellent. So please go ahead and continue to respond to the question, and then we're going to advance to the next slide. If you have not had a chance to join just yet, we'll have Meredith put in the chat how you can join Slido from your computer and continue to respond to the questions as they come in. We'll have a couple more Slido questions along the way, so be on the lookout for those. So to make sure that we're all on the same page here, the working definition of a community of practice that we're using today comes from Lardier et al. In an article that they published in 2023. And so they defined a community of practice as a group of people with a shared common interest who come together to learn how to do it better through interactions with one another. There are three key elements that make up a community of practice. That's a shared interest, community, and practice. These types of groups are not new, but they have become more common over the last few decades. These types of groups are rooted in the assumption that as human beings, we are social creatures who frequently engage in interactions with others to explore knowledge and the meaning of our shared experiences. One of the key findings from these groups is that they help to address feelings of isolation and provide support, collaboration, and professional development needs with peers. There are many different types of communities of practice. And of course, since the rise of COVID and new technology that has become more common now, communities of practice used to be face-to-face, and now we also have virtual communities of practice, which I'm sure is no surprise to any of you. And the acronym that's used for virtual communities of practice is VCOPs. So just wanted to make sure that you are aware of that. In addition, more specifically, you can have more specific communities of practice, such as a faculty learning community or an FLC. And so today, most of the literature that we looked at came from faculty learning communities, but I do want to make sure that you know that even if you are not faculty, that many of the findings that we are sharing with you today do apply across other areas of expertise and fields as well. So this really is for faculty, for staff, and for administrators. And so I encourage you to think about how these things may apply within your sphere of influence. Generally, these types of groups will come together to explore some sort of a topic that's related to teaching and learning, student success, maybe faculty specific challenges, or maybe, for example, student advising specific challenges. And generally, there is a shared product or outcome through the collaboration of these groups. Now, the literature that was used to create this presentation is included at the end of our presentation, and the slides will be made available to you through your NISOD account so that you can refer to any of it if there's something that you'd like to look into further. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Chris. So we have our next question now, having received or heard about some of the basics of a community of practice or learning community. This perhaps sounds more familiar to you. And so just a quick question, do you have any experience with a community of practice? And so we had a nice pool of folks in our last question who were very familiar. So perhaps a few more of you recognize having participated in one. All right, great. Well, we have a lot of folks who have, and plenty more who are joining the concept or diving in for the first time, perhaps. So I think we can go to the next slide when you're ready, Meredith. Our colleague Meredith supporting us on the back end. I'll go ahead and provide a brief history of FLCs in higher education. They first emerged in 2004 at Miami University, developed by Dr. Milton Cox. He's the gentleman on the right. Cox has been credited with their creation, and he successfully implemented many FLCs during his tenure at Miami University. He defined the goal of FLCs as building university-wide community through teaching and learning, and also the goal to increase faculty collaboration across disciplines. Chris? Next slide.
Yes, next slide, please. Thank you. So as I was digging into the literature on this topic, here are some of the findings from the literature about what the needs are specifically for faculty. And again, I think that many of these apply across the board for folks within higher education, but as I was reflecting on these things, I'm going to go into them in a little bit of detail, but I was reflecting on my own experience as adjunct faculty for our local community college, and could really resonate with many of the things that had been found in the literature. And that the first one is feelings of isolation, that oftentimes faculty feel isolated within their profession. And oftentimes I know for myself that I would show up on campus, I'd go teach the 1 or 2 classes that were assigned to me, and then I would go home and I'd spend all my time at home grading papers and then go back the next time and do it all over again. And before I knew it, the semester would be over and I had had very little interaction with any of my peers or colleagues within my department. And so I can see how it's very easy to feel isolated within the academic profession. Also, oftentimes faculty will make decisions about teaching and learning practices that are based upon personal experiences, maybe when you attended college, right? And I was reflecting upon that for myself, that there were certainly professors that I loved, and there were certainly professors that maybe I didn't love quite so much. And so often the techniques or the things that I would use would be based on my personal experience. I mean, let's face it, when we come to teach, to the teaching profession, most of us are not trained to be teachers when we start teaching college. And so that's what we look to is the experiences that we had when we went to college. And so in addition to that, there can be some assumptions that are made about what is a best teaching practice, and that perhaps what worked for us when we were a student, what it sparked or ignited our interest in a subject, will work for students today. And so there can be old assumptions that we're basing our teaching practices upon that perhaps aren't supported by evidence. In addition, oftentimes we attend wonderful workshops or seminars, maybe such as this one, and evidence-based practices are presented, and we walk away really inspired, wanting to make some changes in our courses, only to discover that life takes over, that we get busy in the semester, we're just trying to keep up with the workload, and all of our good intentions kind of fall away because we don't have the time or the energy or the support to be able to actually make the changes that we were inspired to make. And finally, peer-to-peer learning is preferred. That's something that the literature supports, that colleagues prefer to learn from others who are within the same field, who understand the challenges that they're experiencing. And I've heard this echoed from faculty specifically who say, you know, I prefer to hear from other people who know what it's like to be in the classroom and learn from them. And so these were the findings within the literature and the items that these learning communities are attempting to address. Next slide.
Thanks, Chris. So we're going to move next to the connection between FLCs and student success. Research, again, that we are sharing at the end of this shows that FLCs, positively impact student outcomes. They are essential in a significant improvement in learning, improved grades and test scores, improved retention and attendance. And there was also evidence for improved student engagement and participation, as well as student motivation and the improved classroom environment overall. Next slide. To take a slightly deeper dive into the data of how FLCs impact student success, Serum and Madigan reported more than moderate gains through the FLC they implemented, more than moderate gains in creating a positive learning environment, as well as in curriculum design skills, student motivation, and the design and implementation of formative assessments. And best of all, I think maybe my favorite, 68% more than moderate gains in the courage to take risks and try new things in the classroom. And next slide.
So not only do we find that these types of groups can support student success, but they also support faculty in career development. Lemlin et al. And first Milton Cox found that these types of groups, especially FLCs, support individuals to become leaders in the scholarship of teaching and learning. And also it can create this really wonderful interdisciplinary network for faculty within the same institution. And it can create a connection between academic units and inspire an institution to become a learning organization. And so as faculty grow together and become familiar with the literature and evidence-based practices that are in the literature, then they become enthusiastic and want to share it out with other people within their departments. And so they can become a voice and a way to create an environment where teaching is valued, helping to support curriculum reforms, and also leading to the increase of student learning and retention. Next slide, please. So the first one there, the increased awareness of evidence-based practices, we've discussed that briefly, and that was also confirmed by Serum and Madigan in 2010. Also, one of the things that we're seeing is that FLCs enhance faculty collaboration and support, and it increases social capital for them, which means that we're also addressing those feelings of isolation. In addition, it can also help to address feelings of burnout that faculty often feel. So in a study that was conducted also, and I don't have the reference here with me, but it is in our reference slides. There was a finding that there is a need for community among senior and mid-career faculty as well. And so these types of groups can help stimulate one another's intellectual interests, help each other develop and grow, and develop support networks, no matter where you are in your career. Next slide.
Unmute myself. As a refresher, for those who are familiar with faculty learning communities and communities of practice, or to introduce the components, we'll start with a clear mission and purpose. It's important to clearly define the purpose of your community and to define goals and outcomes to work towards. In FLCs set up for success, it's communicated in advance what will be expected of group members and what they will get out of participating. Next, moving to defining structure and curriculum, identify the topic of the community. Perhaps it will be an exploration of best practices from literature. And then I did have the question earlier on in the Q&A, how many participants is reasonable? Some researchers suggest that 10 to 15 is a good goal, but more than 15 is too big. Also consider, will meetings be held in person, online, or both? How often will meetings be held? Some examples of how often to meet perhaps are bi-weekly 90-minute meetings for 1 year. Try that out, suggested by Sierra and Madigan. Also, another example is a monthly workshop. Perhaps it's that format with a monthly cohort meeting 2 weeks following to reflect on workshop content, with course redesign during the first 6 months and then implementation the last 6 months. That's from Hudson and Downs. Another example of how often to meet are ongoing weekly meetings. And then moving next to community administration. For this component, questions to consider are who will be invited? Is your group a subject-specific group? Will it be a cross-disciplinary group? These can also be student support services groups or any other combination of staff, faculty, and administration. Other questions to consider, Will there be an application process to identify group members? If so, what are their requirements? How many participants will be selected? Do you have a cap? What career stage is the group designed for? How will potential participants learn about the group? Next, who will facilitate? If it will be decided through an application process, you'll want to decide what you are looking for in an administrator, or a facilitator rather. If it is a faculty learning group, it makes sense. You would be looking most likely for a faculty member to facilitate. Will there be a stipend or other incentive offered for the selected individual to facilitate? Maybe the leader of the group rotates. There are many possibilities, as many as individuals that you have in your group. Next is community building strategy. And in this component, you would consider how you will build community amongst the group participants themselves. A safe environment for learning and sharing is critical to the success and sustainability of the group. Community building may include establishing guidelines for group participation, getting to know you, and other icebreaker activities that we all love. There are many options here, again, depending on the personality of the group. Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Victoria. And real quickly, have been a couple of questions in Q&A and in chat, but the questions are the same, asking about whether or not these slides will be available. And the answer is yes. They will be available through your NISOD account, probably by tomorrow afternoon. So be on the lookout for that, as well as access to the recording. So to build off what Victoria was saying, all of these items, the components of the faculty learning communities come from this community of practice checklist for success. You can see that reference at the bottom of this slide. It is also included at the end of these slides as well for your reference. So the next component are meetings and activities. And so after you've already gone through and identified and answered the questions that Victoria was presenting for your consideration, once those answers have been identified, now you can move on to what is the structure of the meetings and or activities. And these can be all the same, or they can evolve over time. And as the needs of the community changes, then those meetings can certainly evolve with those changing needs as well. But some types of formats that you may consider for your community would be video calls such as Zoom or WebEx, participating in blogs or writing blog articles together, discussion boards and having those available. Perhaps you want to create a listserv. Maybe it's a Google shared drive where you can upload materials and share them together. Maybe it's a brown bag lunch and seminar, and you invite a special speaker that is an expert on the topic that your group is exploring. So these are just a few of the ideas that can be explored for these types of meetings and communities. You might also consider choosing to create a course that's specific for your learning community using the learning management system that your institution utilizes for student use. Next is scholarship. Many of these groups want to create a final product. They want to be able to share out their findings with their colleagues. So some groups choose to present at a conference. Some groups choose to present at a development day that's specific to their institution. Maybe it's even publishing a white paper or other type of peer-reviewed paper. The possibilities, of course, are endless and lots to consider there. Next is the assessing how the groups are doing. And so it's really important to solicit feedback after the meetings to see if you're accomplishing what you hope to be accomplishing within the community. And so then the feedback can be shared within the group after it's received, and adjustments should be made if they are needed to make sure that it's really creating the kind of community that you're hoping to have. And finally, enablers and rewards. So with this one, these can be things like stipends for participating in the group. Maybe it's release time for full-time faculty or other employees to be able to participate. I participated in a group where a book was provided to each member of the group, and that helped to facilitate our meetings and discussions. It could be door prizes. So anything that you can think of that would be ways of incentivizing attendance within your community. Next slide, please.
My turn. I'm going to move us through common challenges and solutions. Starting with time constraints for faculty. I'm going to start with that third bullet down. It's an obvious one. Just say that these constraints include additional responsibilities placed upon faculty, such as participation, not just in the learning community, but in additional committees. Institutional buy-in and support, that top one popping back up. Before even getting started with a FLC, is there leadership support? And then next, faculty buy-in and support. It can be a challenge due to a culture of individuality. Again, Chris has spoken to isolation. There may also be perceived threats to academic freedom and autonomy. A next common challenge is sustaining long-term engagement, especially where there is not a governing body to provide accountability to communities. And then a last common challenge is power hierarchy. In this one, that kind of challenge can erode a sense of trust and openness within the group. Next slide, please. So we offer some potential solutions from the research to gain faculty buy-in, provide evidence on the effectiveness of learning communities to those who have the power to decide whether the program will be supported and resources provided. Also, create a clear implementation plan for the logistics of the communities, how they will be implemented, and how participants will be recruited. Identify the long-term goals and plans and how they will be achieved to give a clear roadmap for those who can provide buy-in and support and join in. To gain institutional buy-in, align FLC goals with institutional priorities. To encourage long-term engagement, provide recognition and incentives for faculty participation, such as some of the ideas that Chris offered. And to overcome time constraints, consider a hybrid model or a combination of in-person and virtual meetings. Don't forget to consider changing or alternating the physical location of the meetings. And last, to try to avoid possible power hierarchies, identify a governing body who will hold the communities accountable for meeting regularly, meeting or reaching clearly defined goals, and also providing resources to the group. Those resources might include access to online tools, training, and also coaching. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Victoria. As I was looking through the literature, I wanted to share with you a couple of examples that I found that different institutions had implemented successfully, just so that you could see a different variety of how people are able to successfully form these types of groups. So the first one started with a group of chemistry faculty. They had submitted a group for a course redesign. They had submitted a grant application for a course redesign. And so they met together and they got through the process of the course redesign. And when it ended, they realized that they had really enjoyed their time together and that they were all really passionate about student success, and decided that they wanted to go ahead and actually form a more long-term learning community where they could continue to meet together. But it would also be open to other faculty who hadn't been able to participate in the course redesign group. And so they created this new group that was open to others with the vision that they would strive for continuous improvement of instruction and assessment. And this group was supported by their faculty development department at their institution. The faculty development group provided recommendations for how to build community within their specific group, shared resources with them, such as a peer observation protocol that the faculty could choose to implement if they wanted, and other solutions to challenges as requested by the group. This group met on a weekly basis with topics ranging from analysis of exam questions to troubleshooting instructional technology to syllabus revisions and more. And then any of the course materials that they created together as a group, they archived for all current and future faculty to be able to use. And also they decided they wanted to present their findings at a conference. And so they did that together as well. Another example was a multidisciplinary faculty learning community. This community was started because faculty at their institution were attempting to implement active learning within their classrooms, and they discovered that there was some pushback from the students. They were resisting some of these evidence-based practices that faculty were attempting to implement. And so this group was formed because they really wanted to explore the student resistance to active learning. Now, one thing I want to note here is that this topic was very broad, so it was broadly applicable across multiple departments and disciplines. And so you could have faculty from many different places across the institution that participated in this group. All the participants that were invited to participate had equal status, although they did have different levels of experience at the college, anywhere from 4 to 40 years of experience teaching. The structure for their meetings was provided by an individual from the institution's Center for Teaching and Learning by identifying an issue that was related to the overarching topic of student resistance to active learning. And then finally, a goal was set to present the group's findings at an institution-wide event. Next slide. So, of course, anything that we begin, we want to make sure that we have a way to measure the impact to know if it's really working. And so there are a few suggestions that have been provided in the literature of how we can measure this impact or assess the impact for both the participants within the group, but also students. And so there are some surveys that have been developed. For example, Serum and Madigan developed an assessment called the Participant Assessment and Learning Gains survey that could be used to assess the impact of their STEM FLC on student learning. And of course, these types of surveys can be utilized as a jumping off point to adapt them and use them for your own use. In addition, soliciting direct feedback from the participants of the groups, asking about what their experience was like and what the outcomes were for them by participating in the group. So those types of qualitative measures can be very valuable. One group even used focus group interviews to help them measure the impact of the learning community. And then, of course, taking a look at tracking changes in teaching practices and student income. So as faculty make changes, as you make changes within your classroom, tracking to see if you notice a difference in student outcomes and how do you really measure that well. And again, we've provided some resources for you at the end of these slides for you to take a look at to see what other people are doing. Next slide.
Okay, we come to best practices. We appreciate all the past learnings that have been handed down to share with you. Earlier, we looked at FLC challenges and solutions, including for sustainability, and offer these best practices from the research for sustaining engagement, regular reflection and assessment. It helps to build these in as regular individual and group practice. Another best practice is to celebrate success and share outcomes. Also build this into the FLC itself. It's important to share accomplishments and share out how it worked, perhaps a celebration off campus. And then finally, building community. Regularly consider the health of the group and how to build on that too. We do have included in our notes a communities of practice checklist for success provided by Cassidy 2011. It covers everything from starting out to planning activities and fine-tuning to making changes or ending and thinking scholarly. So soup to nuts, it's a great checklist. And next slide, please. And so to bring this to wrap up this part of the presentation, of course, how many of us have attended a lecture or workshop such as this, left inspired to make changes, but then could never find the time or energy? Chris touched on that earlier, certainly. Or maybe you started the change, started that 2025 goal, never fully implemented it. Working as a group with peers helps in many different contexts. Aucoin and Van Seliskar point to research that suggests that ongoing professional learning in supportive contexts, such as professional learning communities, supports professional growth and offers an infrastructure to create a culture for achieving gains in professional development. They recommend that professional development move beyond the traditional sit and get model and that leadership build a culture of collaboration. In other words, participating in a supportive learning community with peers helps to sustain the motivation needed to create your desired change and move beyond just having set some goals or been inspired. Next slide.
Thanks, Victoria. And with that, we know that we've teased you just a little bit with our exciting announcement. And so I am so happy to share with you that we here at NISOD are really taking to heart the recommendation of Aucoin and Vaseliskar's of having these learning communities and creating a supportive environment and creating network and community. And so we are creating our own NISOD learning communities for you. And so we're going to take just a minute and walk you through what this launch is going to look like and the process for getting involved. Before we do that, though, I do want to take just a minute and encourage you to consider, of course, implementing learning communities at your own institutions. There's a lot of value in that. And also, we want to provide a way for you to be able to connect with other folks within your same positions nationwide. We often hear from our institutions that many people struggle with similar challenges, or that they found wonderful solutions to some of the challenges that students experience or faculty experience or some of our staff and administrators. And so we want to be able to help you connect with one another so that you can learn with one another. And that's really what's at the heart of our learning communities. So at this time, you'll see that Meredith has dropped in the chat a link to our webpage for NISOD Learning Communities. You can find a little bit more information there. And currently, I'm going to walk you through the timeline so that you'll understand how the launch of these learning communities is going to take place. We are currently looking for facilitators and the topics that they are wanting to lead for our learning communities. We want to hear from you what your needs are, what topics are burning for you that you're trying to find solutions to. And so the goal is to identify facilitators first and those topics first, and then launch our learning communities in the fall. Next slide, please. So to walk you through this timeline, beginning today, we are accepting applications for the facilitators and topics, as I mentioned. And those applications will be open through March 3rd. So you have a little bit of time to think about whether or not you feel like you would be interested in leading one of these groups and what the topic might be. Also, just to set your mind at ease, if you volunteer to be a facilitator, you will not be alone in that. One of our NISOD staff will be meeting with you in advance of the launch of the community to help you outline what you want this community to look like, what support NISOD will be providing for you, and what the structure of your meetings will be, and answering all those types of questions with you. During March 17th through April 7th, those applications that are submitted will be reviewed. The facilitators and topics will be selected, and facilitators will be notified. And from there, we'll get those learning communities posted on our website. And that way, anyone who wants to participate in a learning community but is not yet ready to step up and be a facilitator, you can come see which learning communities are being offered, and you will be able to then apply to participate in one of those learning communities. Then our learning communities will officially launch between August 1st and September 15th. And some of that flexibility is built in there because it depends upon the facilitators and what is going to work best for our facilitators. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and that leads us to our last Slido question that Victoria is going to share with you now.
Yeah, just off the top of your head, or perhaps you have participated previously in a community of practice or faculty learning community, if there's a topic that would be most helpful to you in your role, we would love to hear. We're going to have a little word cloud created here. Yes, AI is very hot, so I'm not surprised to see that one at all. Also, high flex course design. Wonderful. This is going to be really helpful to us just to understand what's burning for you right now in terms of where you could perhaps use a larger community, whether at your institution or across the NISOD network. Wow.
Yeah, and Audrey, I did want to let you know that I saw your question in chat about occasional collaborations between communities. In just a moment, we're going to open things up to Q&A, and we're going to have people please raise their hand so we can call on you and allow you to talk. And Audrey, at that time, I'm going to ask you for a little bit more clarification, because I think your idea sounds intriguing, but I want to make sure I understand it. All right. Let's go ahead. I love those ideas, and I love seeing what is really on your mind and where you're wanting to engage with other people to understand how they're maybe applying or doing these sorts of things within their classroom.
Chris, I have a question. Do you know if this word cloud will be able to hang on to it so that folks can refer back to it? Or see what some other ideas were that were across the group here?
Well, it'll be part of our recording that we will be posting afterwards. So you'll definitely be able to see what these responses were after our presentation today by referring back to this recording. And we can certainly leave these responses at our Slido site or take a screenshot for you as well and send that along if that's helpful to you. And also the recording, we'll have it posted on our website, but to be able to access it before that happens, you will find it in your NISOD account by tomorrow afternoon. And let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. Here you're just going to see our references that you will also have access to. And then finally, our last slide. We've provided our contact information so that if you have any questions you'd like to follow up with us after this presentation, please feel free to reach out to us. We are very happy to engage with you. And so at this time, I'd like to go ahead and address the questions that have come in, as well as if you have a question and you are comfortable coming off mute, please do raise your hand so that we can find you quickly and bring you on. Okay, and so there's a question from Galen about, do we have experience with stacking learning communities and their deliverables into a campus recognized credential, such as a badging system or a certificate? I'm thinking of an equity-minded assessment, community of practice that would have several parts: syllabus redesign, grading, equity, etc. Any advice or resources are appreciated. So yeah, that's a great question. I love the direction that you're going with that. I haven't specifically seen anything like that. Although what I would like to do is, of course, ask our audience, does anyone have experience with with this question and this idea? And if so, please reach out and let us know so that we can put you into contact. Also, I certainly have, if you'll email me directly with your question, I do have a network of folks that I could potentially reach out to that have been working on credentialing. And so I might be able to track down some additional resources for you that way. The other thing that I've seen is that EDUCAUSE is an association that they do have seminars or what they call labs that you can participate in and learn more about how to put together a micro-credential program. And so you may find that of help as well. And I can Meredith, do you mind tracking down a link for EDUCAUSE for us, please?
So Chris, in the meantime, there have been a couple of sharings in the chat, I think in response to Galen, when institution uses Badger with Canvas. Another suggestion was doing an inclusive, or rather, sorry, they're moving around a little bit. Doing an inclusive course design, faculty learning community at their college. So that would be great to learn more about. Design Lab, Alamo College, Madison College, Digital Credentialing Institute, and use of merit in badges also. Lots of great information out there.
Yeah, definitely. There was also another question that came in the Q&A about whether there are these facilitator positions for our groups are paid, or if there's any sort of an incentive to lead the groups. And unfortunately, this time we don't have the ability to provide a monetary incentive for you. What I would suggest and encourage is thinking about if there is something in this for you that would help you in terms of career development and resume building, and being able to learn in facilitating a group. Yeah, and certainly that's something that we would definitely like to continue to explore into the future. It's not something that we're able to offer currently. All right, looks like Meredith has put in the chat that link for EduCause. Thanks, Meredith, appreciate it. Oh, it does look like we have a hand raised. And Robin, I'm going to go ahead and have you unmute. And Audrey, if you're still here, would you also raise your hand and I'll go ahead and call on you because I do want to make sure I understand your question before I respond to it. Oh,
Hi, thank you. Robin Bryce, Special Programs Manager over at Yavapai College. And I know I've been tasked, we have this community of practice that we've started this year, and I've been tasked with kind of leading it. We're calling it the What Is Next Coalition. You know, our eyes are on the future, a lot of future forecasting. And you know, and came up with a charter and these ideas, you know, having these PLCs and these monthly meetings and bringing in speakers, and we're doing some of that. We've had some pretty cool speakers and some topics, and I really appreciate the conversation here because it's actually made me feel less of a loser. I'm like, okay, I am actually doing some of the things that we need to do. But I think, you know, where I find struggle is, you know, I know we're all so busy, and I love the ideas of like the subcommittees and the, you know, everybody tackling kind of like problems that are of interest and asking those questions and drilling down to like where we should be focused, because that's what we've been tasked to do, is to kind of offer guidance and suggestions to, you know, leadership and other committees as they're making their decisions. And I really appreciate you sharing that document about like the checklist. And I think that I'm going to refer to that. But I think that's where I struggle, is like gathering these groups together and coming up with like the framework, you know, who's going to be the facilitators and how we're going to, you know, communicate back with other groups. It just all seems so big and so much to like tackle on top of all the other things that, you know, we're all trying to do. And, you know, I know we've gotten started, but I still feel like we haven't really gotten started. And I don't know, I'm just curious of like what is your guidance? What is your comfort? Hug me. No, but what are some things that I can really do to kind of get started and help out with some of these like sub and smaller committees, so we can continue to have these tackling these larger problems, these things that are coming across the future in our community? I know that was a lot, but I hope that makes sense, kind of what I'm asking.
yeah, I think that's a great question. Of course, Victoria, I'm going to invite you to jump in as ideas come to you. I think for the first thing that comes to mind for me as I am listening to what you're doing is, first off, good job. I understand how overwhelming some of these things can be, and certainly our own process of putting together these learning communities here at NISOD has really, you know, taken quite some time to figure out what does this process look like and how can we do this in a way that's successful. And so the first thing that I would say to you is, you know, thinking back on the checklist and the literature and reading other people's experience, one of the things that comes to mind for me is making sure that you're just checking in regularly with your people that are participating, and being sure to ask them for their suggestions, and being sure to include them in this process of fully developing what your ideas are, what you're hoping to accomplish. But the other thing too, I would say, is take it a step at a time. And so your vision may be really big and grand, but it doesn't have to be big and grand. It doesn't have to be implemented in a grand way right at the beginning. And so taking it a step at a time so that you can have the time you need to be comfortable with the process and really think through what are each of these steps, and just kind of take it a step at a time. And then, of course, as I mentioned, solicit that feedback as you're going along. And one of the things that I found as I was reading through how many of these groups were implemented was the idea that it grew over time. You know, it started small. They had a small group of people who wanted to get together. They wanted to learn and collaborate. but it grew into something a lot larger, and a lot of that was because of the motivation and excitement and the people who are participating in the group and their ideas and what they were able to contribute as well. I hope that
Chris,
helps you.
yeah, I would just add to that, just to revisit the goals and maybe right size if needed. And as you revisit, check in with each other and reassess. I think it would be very ambitious and very exciting at the beginning, trying to achieve a lot. But recognizing the time constraints naturally, I think there's an opportunity there to right size things. And even if it feels like maybe sitting on your hands, but picking a priority or asking others like the leadership group to pick the priority.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, there are a few more questions in chat, but I do want to make sure we get to Audrey's question, and then I'm going to come back on and talk a little bit about the estimated time and commitment for facilitators, as well as submitting the topics and facilitating groups. So, Audrey.
Hi. So we have communities of practice at my institution, which seem to be essentially the same as the learning communities you all are talking about. And our facilitators are their own community. So some of our separate sort of like topic focuses, when they overlap, the facilitators talk about having collaborations together, not for, the all of that semester's meetings, but occasionally where it makes sense to bring those two groups of people together. Like, for example, one of ours is focused on humanizing courses, which I think you all have listed as culturally responsive teaching. And sometimes they overlap with our educational technology learning community. And so where that happens, the facilitators kind of work together to think about like how they want to run that conversation or what they're going to focus on. And so I was just curious if that was sort of a part of your program, if you envision like sort of the training that happens to the facilitators or the NISOD staff member who is helping them, like it being a large group conversation maybe, or I don't know. So yeah, I was just curious about that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And it's actually not something that I had considered when we started implementing this, but I don't see why we couldn't do something like that. And certainly as we see that crossover between topics, depending on those topics and depending on the facilitators, and if that's something that they find value in and want to help make that happen, then absolutely we can consider something like that. And thank you for that suggestion. Love
Sure.
it.
And anyone starting at their own institution, I would recommend having like an introduction to learning communities and maybe like what they have done here and then letting people branch off into different topics. That's been kind of useful to us at our institution.
Thank you. All right, great. So there was a question about, do we have an estimated time commitment for facilitators? And that's really up to you. When you fill out the application to be a facilitator and submit a topic for consideration, it's going to ask you what you want your meetings to be, how often you want them to be held. It can be monthly, it could be every other month, it can last for 2 semesters, it can last for one semester, it can be an hour once a month, whatever you feel like is reasonable. And so there's a lot of control for you in what the time commitment will be. In addition to that, let's say that you'd like to have some peer-reviewed articles that are available for the group members to read in advance of a meeting. And so that's something that the NISOD staff support member could have ready and available and send out to group members in advance of the meeting. And also setting up a course for you where all of those resources can be accessed.
Chris, speaking of resources, I was trying to help with a question about the application period, and there's a really good point that the application is not actually available on the learning community page at this time.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll take a look at that at the end of today. I imagine it's a matter of a button that just needs to be activated. So I'll take a look at that, and you should be able to find it on our webpage by the end of today. And then the applications for topics, those go hand in hand with the facilitator application. So right now, we are looking for folks who are willing to facilitate and have a topic in mind that they want to talk about with peers. So rather than having you submit just a topic, we're looking for the combination of a facilitator and a topic together. Can you submit more than one idea? Absolutely. We'll probably choose one or the other. But yes, you can submit multiple ideas. Any other questions out there that we haven't addressed? We are at 2 o'clock, so we definitely want to keep that in mind, and we don't want to keep you from the other commitments that you have. But we are so happy that you joined us today, and please do feel free to reach out if there is anything further that we can do to assist you. And we're looking forward to having these groups with you and getting them set up and helping you to create community across the nation. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Meredith.